Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
I had a male coworker argue with me one time about how I couldn't work the 24-hour on-call because the staff quarters only had showers and not tubs, and women need tubs. And how can I respond at a moment's notice when I'm dealing with my menstrual cycle? It was all very unprofessional. Keep in mind, this is a very religious person that was married to his wife when they were 16. They were only 19 at this time, but they lived a very traditional life. She was a stay-at-home wife, all that kind of jazz. Eventually, I just asked him, hey, why don't you just tell me and explain to me why I need a bathtub for my menstrual cycle? Long story short, this man's wife told him that women have their menstrual cycle for 3 weeks, and the only time you can have sex is for a couple days when you're ready to receive God's gift. I'm assuming when you're ovulating. For the other 3 weeks, women need to lay in the bathtub for 2 hours every night and be left the fuck alone so she can let the blood out. To not fuck with her game, I told him that God looks down on women working, so our periods are cut down to only 1 day, and we deal with it on our days off. Educate your fucking kids.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
So I used to work front desk at a hotel, and I was chatting with a guest one day, and at one point he asked what my name was. I said, my name's Cartier. And he was like, oh, that's interesting. How is that spelled? And so I spelled it for him, and he was like, no. And I was like, what do you mean no? And he's like, that's pronounced Cartier. And I was like, no, actually, it's French, so it's pronounced Cartier, but Cartier is fine in English. And then he proceeded to argue with me about it back and forth, trying to be like, no, ER does not make an A sound. And I was like, not in English, no, but in French it does. And then he was like, okay, but it's French. Can you even name one person who speaks French? And I was like, en fait, moi, je parle français.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
I have a lot of these, and most of them come from first dates, but my favorite is the time a man asked me what I studied in undergrad, and I told him I studied Middle English literature, medieval literature. And he spent the next several minutes explaining that Shakespeare was meant to be performed and viewed on stage, not studied in classrooms on paper, and I'd probably wasted my time. Of course, Shakespeare is not medieval literature.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
Oh my god, I've got such a good one for this. It happened a year ago and it still blows my freaking mind. So I was on this date with a guy, that was my first mistake, and it was going pretty well, like we seemed to be getting on, we're having a laugh. Now, I have a toxic trait where I tend to go on feminist rants in the middle of dates. I don't know why, it always happens, but he was taking it really well and we seemed to align on a lot of our views. And then we got onto our jobs, and for context, I'm an engineer, so it's a very male-dominated space, and he asked me about that, and he said, like, how do you find that? Do you experience sexism? Have you had any issues in that workspace? And I replied that generally the guys that I've worked with have been really great, but you do get the occasional guy mansplaining your job back to you, which can be quite annoying. I shit you not, this guy goes, well, I mean, mansplaining's when you explain something back to someone that they already know. So if the guy's explaining an aspect of your job that he knows about that you already also know about, that would be mansplaining. Fucking mansplaining back to me in a conversation about mansplaining, and it wasn't even a joke because I called him out and he went, oh shit, the audacity.
The stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained.
I love when men mansplain things to me because then I get to respond to it. And I've crafted so many perfect responses to mansplaining. I'd like to share them with you. Here's my first and favorite one, when they explain something to you that's just blatantly obvious. And if it's so obvious, let's remember that has nothing to do with us and everything to do with them. Sometimes I'll just ignore it because I'm thinking, oh, you must not have known that recently. That's kind of cute. But if I want to call them out on it, I'll just go, yeah, so when did you learn that? They just go, and if they get real defensive, well, I've always known that. Then I get to go, so then why would you think that I wouldn't? Okay, but also when they explain something to you that you just said, like they explain back to you something you just said, then I go, yeah, that's so great. I'm so glad that you understood what I was saying. That's perfect. Good job. They get so mad. Okay, or when they're just being a total dick and they're mansplaining and you get to go, that's almost right.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
I changed my flat tire in front of a whole bunch of girls and a dude, and then the dude decided to tell all of us that when you run over something sharp, it pops! And because of the weight of the car, and there's a hole in the tire, air is going to come out of it. He did that because he felt inferior to me and wanted to impress the ladies because the ladies were focused on the fact that I just knew how to change a tire. You know what the fucking kicker is? You know what the kicker is? I didn't care if they were impressed. Because I was trying to impress him. Because I am a homosexual.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
When I was 16, I was about to have sex with my boyfriend for the first time, so I asked a more experienced friend what to expect. And he said, just be careful it doesn't go into the wrong hole. And I was like, the butt? He said, no, the pee hole. And I said, I don't think it fits in there. And he explained that it's a common problem, that sometimes it just slips into the pee hole. And I said, I don't think that's how it works. And he said, yes, that is how it works. And I said, I feel like I've counted all the holes. I feel like I know. And he said, trust me.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you. I'll go first. I was 20 years old when my ex explained to me what a pillow is used for. He told me that the pillow is used to support your neck and your head. I was also a feature speaker at a poetry night, and a man came up to me and explained to me what I meant by the title of my poetry collection. And he was wrong, and I told him that he was wrong, and he said, no, I think this is what you were trying to get at. And I was like, no, you're wrong. And he did not believe me, even though it was a title I created for a work of poems that I wrote. Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
Off-duty OBGYN here. Where do I begin? So I used to do circumcisions on newborn baby boys, and a dad was very specific on how he wanted his son's circumcision done and offered to show me his own circumcision so that I would see exactly what he was referring to. I refused. And the more than once that a gentleman had to explain to me how to repair an episiotomy to his exact specifications immediately after the delivery of his child. And then in the office, more than once, gentlemen insisting that I give their partners medication so that they would want to have relations with them. And of course, there's the more than once that I was told in front of people's partners that I was too pretty to be a doctor.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
A man once told me that Jeff Bezos didn't own any stock because all of his net worth was tied up in his ownership of Amazon. A share of stock is ownership of a company. He effectively owns Amazon because he owns like 35 million shares worth of Amazon stock. That's what stock is. That's what it is.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
One time this guy tried to explain to me that women's vaginas are just one giant labia. I told him, well, actually, women have two pairs of labias, labia majora and the labia minora. He doubled down and told me that I was wrong and that it's incredibly dangerous that sexually active women like myself don't have a basic understanding of our own bodies.
Stitch this with the stupidest thing a man has ever mansplained to you.
Oh, I've got one. About a year ago, my mom had been briefly dating this guy, and on the night that I met him, he picked me and my mom up in his truck. And it was a pretty chilly night. It was like January or February. My mom was feeling chilly. She was sitting in the front seat, so she decided to turn off the AC. I shit you not. He decided to explain to her that AC, in fact, stood for air conditioning. And that even if she was cold, she was not allowed to turn off the AC, because that means that the air in the car would not be properly conditioned. Word for word. He explained that to her and me in the backseat. My mother has a PhD. Not that that even has anything to do with this, but I was flaming with rage in the backseat, and she broke up with him shortly thereafter.